All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final Center for Energy Studies Friday webinar series of 2020. This is something that we started during the pandemic to stay connected with you all, and a series that we devoted to a couple of my favorite topics, waste management and sustainability. So thanks to all the viewers for tuning in. We sure do appreciate all of your support throughout these months, and we will continue our series in 2021 with deeper dives into specific waste streams. We'll be looking at lithium-ion batteries and e-waste and renewables and other policy issues pertaining to hazardous waste management. And we'll also have several webinars that are focused on advanced recycling technologies. So I want to thank my research associates and extend my sincere gratitude to Mathilde Boplat-Sada. She was instrumental in the administrative, the outreach, and the logistics for coordinating every single one of my webinars. So I really appreciate all that you do to contribute to my research and to the CES mission. So thanks for that. And today I am joined by a former colleague of mine, Emily Tipaldo. Emily and I worked together in Washington, D.C. at American Chemistry Council, and we were both directors there in the Regulatory and Technical Affairs division, and I covered process safety and haz waste stuff and Superfund and all of that. And Emily, you started in Reg Tech as well, and then you eventually migrated over to lead the packaging and consumer products division. And it's great to see that we're both still largely engrossed in similar issues from when we were both at ACC. And I'm so thrilled for your new role as Executive Director of the U.S. Plastics Pact. So thank you so much for your time, Emily. And I'm really happy to have you here to discuss circular economy, sustainability, and plastics. So welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to the Baker Institute. I'm really, really glad to be here. Just thrilled for the opportunity and look forward to the questions, especially sort of, this is getting a little bit out of my usual bubble, which is always a good thing. Let's get this going here. All right, so the U.S. Plastics Pact, I will do my best to talk a little bit about what the pact is, sort of why the pact has come together, and what we're looking to accomplish, and how the pact, I think, is really different in this space of addressing plastic waste, looking at building a circular economy in the US, and evaluating how we deliver product to the market and how we can do a better job of incorporating that into a circular system. So yeah, just as you think about questions, I'm really excited to take them at the end. The pact is meant to address this issue of, the end of life once we use our products that are packaged in plastic, and then what we do with that. We know, and there's research and data out there. It seems like, on a pretty regular basis, there are new publications coming out, just looking at our generation of plastic packaging and waste, and our inability to manage what we're putting onto the market, both in the US and globally. There are lots of efforts underway, and there have been. I would say there's really sort of a wave over the last 5 or 10 years to this effect, a greater awareness around these issues and initiatives to try and deal with them, in the advocacy space, in the research space, looking for ways to unite sort of different parts of the value chain to address these issues. So the U.S. Plastics Pact is bringing together corporate business, public sector, nonprofits, including sort of traditional environmental NGOs, as well as trade associations, to come up with a strategy around a circular economy for plastic packaging. And our boundaries are, are the US. I would say, if you remember two things from this afternoon's presentation, they're the following: that the pact, there's a vacuum out there in terms of a national strategy around how we create a circular economy for plastic packaging. So the pact, in effect, will be creating a national strategy as to how we realize that circular economy. And then the second element here, which is, I think, a main tenet that sets the pact apart from a lot of other voluntary initiatives, is twofold. So it's this idea that we're built around transparency and accountability. So while, yes, this is a voluntary effort, and the businesses and cities and organizations that have signed on, they've done it, because they see it as important to their business and to their operations, but they know, we need to add some teeth to this. And so I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute, but there's an annual reporting requirement that everyone agrees to when they sign on to the pact. The pact is organized around these 4 targets. And they're similar, which I'll talk a little bit more about this point in just a minute. The pact itself, so the Plastics Pact, is actually part of a broader network of global pacts. And each has sort of similar targets globally. Some of the numbers are tweaked a little bit. There isn't one that sort of necessarily takes precedent over another, and they're all very interconnected. So the first is around reduction. So what can we, or what do we identify as problematic or unnecessary in the US context? And again, sort of our frame of reference here is plastic packaging put onto the US market. So what is deemed and defined as problematic or unnecessary, and making those determinations by 2021 with a plan to eliminate those items by 2025. The second target here is all around 100% reusability, recyclability, or compostability of plastic packaging put onto the US market by 2025. The third is effectively a 50% recycling or composting rate for plastic packaging in the US. And the third piece is specific to, really upping the amount of post-consumer recycled content that's going back into plastic packaging, or responsibly sourced bio-based content. So averaging 30% of those materials across the board when it comes to plastic packaging in the US. When we launched in August, so we've only been going for a little while. I feel like we're on this extremely fast moving train here. And we launched with 62 activators, and that's the name that we've given our pact signatories. And I think this is really incredible, particularly given the year that we're in. So, when you factor in the amount of political uncertainty, when you factor in the coronavirus, it's pretty amazing that these 62 organizations sort of took that leap of faith, and they were like, yeah, this will help us. No one company can address the challenges that we have. So we need to figure out collectively how we're able to do this. So these activators joined us. Since then, we've had a handful come on. So we launched with 62. We're now up to 81 organizations that span the plastic packaging value chain. It's pretty amazing. There, of course, are certain sectors that are a little more represented than others. So we're working to build that out. But we have some sort of cool public sector participation. I know from the state of Texas, the city of Austin is participating, and they're a great partner. So yeah, so it's neat to see all of these different groups come together. So I had mentioned earlier that the US Plastics Pact is part of a broader global network. And to step back a little bit, so in 2016 or so, a foundation called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, or EMF for short, which is based in the United Kingdom, came together. EMF is well-known. Ellen MacArthur, whom the foundation is named after, it did a solo sail around the globe and became sort of infatuated with this concept of circular economy. And they work that in a number of different areas. And in 2016, they launched their new plastics economy work. And that was really the genesis for this whole pact idea. So at the global level, through that new plastic economy work, they have what they call a global commitment. And there are a handful of multinational companies that have signed on to that global commitment to make progress toward establishing a circular economy for plastic packaging globally. You know, how do we essentially put everything that we're using back into the system in a valuable way? And so since then, since that launch of the global commitment, they've worked on in-country pacts to help, again, sort of, you know, to help those multinational companies really realize their global commitment, but do it in an in-country context. So the first pact that launched in late 2017 or so was the UK pact. And since then, a handful of others have launched. There are now 9 total. Canada is set to launch a pact in January of 2021. Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, they're launching a regional one shortly. There are developments in Brazil, Kenya, Senegal. So the network is definitely growing. And there are lots of advantages to this. I think, you know, a number of the material challenges sort of from the technical side, and then as well as sort of from the feedstock, like putting recycled content back into manufacturing processes and products, are very similar across geographies. Yes, you know, there are definitely differences in terms of system financing on the waste side, or waste infrastructure itself. But the material challenges, both sort of from the design standpoint, as well as looking at, you know, how are we reincorporating these materials into the system, are very similar. So there's lots to be gained from the different existing pacts. This slide is really kind of self-evident. I know I had talked about how we have actors or participants sort of from all parts of the value chain. I think a couple of points here, though. I had mentioned we call our pact signatories or members activators. And that's a really intentional word that I sort of didn't fully get until I came into the role. So, you know, we know that in order to make sort of the significant change that's needed to meet those 2025 goals, those 4 targets that I spoke to earlier, it's not me as a facilitator or the staff that I'm working with that's going to make that change. It's everyone who's participating in the pact who is going to have to sort of figure out what is in my control, sort of what can I take responsibility for, and make what will honestly be some difficult decisions in order to make good on those commitments that I signed on to as a pact signatory. So, you know, the members or the activators need to take action if we're going to achieve our 4 goals. There are a number of different, you know, angles, obviously, as to why different sectors are participating in the pact. I think, you know, it is sort of a unique picture, particularly having the level of public sector engagement that we do, you know, both in terms of like the experience on the ground with waste and recycling infrastructure. There's a lot of interest from the public sector around piloting reuse models and sort of looking at alternative ways to deliver product to the market. So yeah, it's interesting sort of having all of those groups work together. We have an advisory group, sort of a leadership group within the pact that is intentionally sort of has representatives across the value chain so that we have that cross-sector representation, and it really helps to bring all of those pieces together. So back to that point that I mentioned at the beginning, if you remember only two things from today, the first is that the pact in effect is going to be setting a national strategy for a circular economy for plastics. And the second being around transparency and accountability. And that's where this comes into play. So the pact itself, when it was put together and the genesis of it with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Recycling Partnership, which is a recycling-focused nonprofit in the US, came together with the World Wildlife Fund to stand up the pact with guidance from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And one of the key responsibilities behind the participation of World Wildlife Fund is their role with their resource plastic footprint tracker tool. So right now they have this tool that corporate business can use to help track the generation of plastic, both products and packaging actually by corporate business, what's being put onto the market from a global standpoint. And we're modifying this tool to use it for the Pact's annual reporting. So our piece will be, again, specific to the US and specific to packaging. Right now, the corporate piece is much better built out because that's sort of how the resource plastic tool is built at this point in time. And we're in the process of developing what the module will look like for the public sector, for nonprofits. I mean, sort of all of the reporting for the pact will be, with an eye toward what are you doing as an organization to help us collectively meet those 4 goals. So what types of activities are you engaged with? What types of support are you providing, whether it's financial or otherwise, to initiatives that are working toward the pact's goals? Right now, we're the pact itself. So again, talking about the fast moving train that we're on, we just launched at the end of August. We now have 6 work groups in place. And yesterday we just started our roadmap development process, or talking about that national strategy that we're putting together. The work streams, these are the 6 work streams that we have kicked off with. They are intentionally meant to feed into that strategy development, that roadmap development. So there are some foundational elements that need to be decided as we develop our strategy. I think a couple important points to note. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastics Economy Framework, of which sort of we are a part of as the pact, has specific definitions for a number of key terms, which act as our baseline. And that's true across pacts. So to give you an example, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a very particular definition of recyclable package, which differs than what you would find with the US Federal Trade Commission's green guides. What's unique about it, without getting too far into the weeds, and happy to share more information about the definitions, but for both thinking about what a recyclable package is or what a compostable package is, it's that marriage of technical recyclability or compostability, along with answering the questions of, is it happening at scale and in practice? So sort of marrying all of those elements together and then being able to make an assessment. So all of that to say that we use the Ellen MacArthur Foundation definitions, which includes other things like material recycling, chemical recycling, post-consumer resin, taking all of those into account as we're thinking about our strategy and what are the different metrics that we need to look at. So we have a scope and data group. There's still questions out there. Are things like plastic cutlery or plastic stirrers considered packaging? Do we want to sort of right out of the gate tackle primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging, or be a little more focused in certain ways? I had mentioned that the Pact is not an advocacy organization, which we are not. However, I think we're in kind of a unique position because we are the only pact that exists that does not have some level of federal regulation or legislation supporting us. So globally, when you look at the other existing pacts, they have something, whether it's around a waste directive or a circular economy measure or something specific to plastic packaging or just packaging writ large. Like we're operating without that. So then that means for us, what can we do from a market standpoint to really maximize our ability to meet our 4 targets? And then what sorts of supporting legislation would we like to be in place to help us? And so again, while we won't be lobbying directly for those things, it's within our scope to say, these types of measures as part of our strategy will enable us to meet our 4 goals. So I had mentioned, a lot of the work stream or smaller work group efforts that are happening now will feed into our roadmap development, and that's where we are at this point. We are not being that kind to ourselves. We have a really short timeline for putting together a really aggressive strategy and hope to have the content of our strategy completed by the end of March. And it really stinks that none of us can be together, because it would be awesome just to be in a room and sort of knock this out in 2.5 days through a series of workshops. But, we're figuring out how to do this virtually. So we had a 2-hour workshop yesterday, had over 100 people, 10 breakout sessions, had participation from our Canadian counterparts who will be leading that pact to try and stay really connected there, knowing how tight the North American market is. We have workshops planned for January, February, and March. And we'll likely have sort of dozens of one-on-ones and sort of small group conversations. But really just thinking about our 4 targets that we have, like what is the work back plan for that? And what are the outcomes that we want to see for each of those 4 targets in order for them to be true by 2025? And then what are the associated tactics and activities? Everything from investment needs, pilot projects, research, sort of, novel research, leveraging other initiatives. I think that's a good point. We're really cognizant of the fact that we have very little time and not a lot of resources, and really don't have the wherewithal to try and duplicate things that are going on. So as part of our roadmap process, how do we identify what other initiatives are happening that are complementary to what we're trying to do, and how do we leverage that, either by just sort of bringing them into the fold, or funding them to do additional research or build out their research, or whatever it may be, but finding a way to leverage existing initiatives. And I'll really leave it there. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're interested in participating, happy to do, talk about that as well. I will say, I had mentioned earlier on, some sectors within the value chain, and to be totally candid about it, we lack enough representation, in my opinion, from the material suppliers. And so like the resin producers in this case, as well as the reclaimers or the recyclers. We have one resin producer, Eastman, who's participating right now, and a handful of reclaimers or recyclers, but could definitely build out those spaces, as well as potentially some greater participation from the environmental NGO community. We have some representation there, but we're lacking some of the spicier ones. So as part of, whether it's through formal participation, or as we build out our roadmap, we're looking for sort of alternative ways to get feedback and input where we currently lack those voices. So Thank you again, and look forward to questions.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Emily. This is exceptional and really exciting. As someone who's motivated by waste management sustainability, I recognize how pivotal and influential this endeavor is. So we're going to be excited to engage with the U.S. Plastics Pact moving forward. And there's a question that it sounds like you answered. The question is, do you anticipate drawing on the support and experience of the petrochemical industry within the membership of the activator group? And I would presume, yes, you're looking for actors all across the supply chain to help feed into solutions.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely from, the supplier standpoint, as well as those who are exploring chemical recycling technologies. Yeah, from all ends of the spectrum.
Okay, great. And then the other question is what are the two most important or significant achievements that would soon start impressing the public that improvements in reducing plastic pollution can actually start occurring? I mean, because you do have a very close target deadline of 2025. And so there's going to be some major, decisions and movements that sounds like will be coming soon.
Yeah, so the first one, which you can't sugarcoat in any way, is around that first target. And maybe I'll just, sorry if I'm making people, there we go. This whole idea of reduction. So I like to think about it from a higher standpoint for a bit. So if we're serious about sort of getting the materials that we're using back into the system and sort of not losing the value of that material, and we think about sort of the whole pie of plastic packaging put onto the US market, as we start to pick apart, like, how do we optimize getting that material back into the system? We know, based on technology limitations, based on financing, that sort of different things will shake out to be true. So, for example, this whole idea of creating a list of problematic and unnecessary really gives the US market like the heebie-jeebies. Like, the US does not like lists of any kind. It's like a different story in Europe. But here, don't like that. So we can't start from somebody else's list. Like, we need to go through the deliberative process of looking at, how have these criteria been applied before, just as a benchmark? Do we agree with that or not? What sorts of questions do we think we should be asking? And what does it mean to be problematic or unnecessary? And I think for me, at this point, it kind of breaks down into, like, so we know that, say there's a challenging material that's kind of in this gray space, and you have to ask yourself, like, is it on a trajectory to be reused, recycled, or composted? And well, just initially, if it's not on that trajectory, then that's a major red flag. And obviously there are lots of reasons why maybe it's not. Some of those things that are in that problematic or sort of challenging space now that maybe aren't recycled at scale, or are not yet recyclable, but there's a lot of it on the market. But yet at the same time, they're like really high levels of R&D to move it along that trajectory to either be, reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And I think those are some really good indicators of where the industry feels as though, like, this is really valuable to the market, whether it's because of its environmental footprint, its cost, its efficacy, whatever it may be. Like, there's a lot of effort behind making that thing recyclable. I think flexible films are a really good example of that. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I will say this has got to be one of the most challenging ones to identify, because there's so many different factors to consider when looking at this. I mean, are you looking at it from the standpoint of is it a detriment to human health, the environment, or
yeah,
ecosystem health? Are you looking at social imbalances? Are you looking at lack of existing commodity markets or dearth of technological processes to actually manage those materials? And, all of these conditions, create items that are problematic and difficult to recycle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the plastic or product in and of itself should be eliminated, right? I mean, what it does indicate is that there's a deeper fundamental systemic issue in our plastic waste and recycling economy that needs to be resolved. That could then create a more favorable market condition for improving its value and thus its recyclability. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking about this is that, are you looking at this from a current state, or are you looking at this from a future state? Where we'll have created all of these efficiencies in the overall recycling supply chain. We'll have better collection systems, more informed customers, and we'll have the technology to actually recover certain polymers through chemical recycling. And thus some of these plastics we deem as problematic today may not necessarily be in a system that is fully functional. So I guess the question is when you approach this, is the perspective in the current state, or is it in the future state, or it's probably a combination of both of those?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's kind of weird tension between the two at any given time. So I mean, ideally, like, we want to be thinking future state. I mean, even if that's only 4 years away, like in 2025. But we're creating the ideal system, so future state, such that we're able to meet these goals. But at the same time, it's so hard to get people sort of out of present state thinking and limitations. And so I think that's like something that we're constantly working with people on. And it's also, and I mentioned the tension because it's funny, because on the one hand, nobody wants to wind up characterized as problematic or unnecessary, but then at the same time, they'll come back and just tell you, like, well, what all the hurdles are to meeting these challenges. It's like, well, we need to be thinking about future state, and then maybe you won't wind up on the problematic or unnecessary list. So the intention is, like, we are working toward 2025, not today, not tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think it's ensuring that this effort doesn't precipitously phase out or eliminate materials or packaging that could add value and serve a purpose in a system that is fully functional, and that polymers and other materials aren't being phased out solely because of the current system limitations and deficiencies, because I think that would earmark and cast out a whole lot of things. But yeah, so you've got a big job ahead of you when devising that that list. And so the other thing, so after all of those designations are made, and we're going to have an influx of all of these unquantified tons of plastic that's circulating in our system, that's going to be entering the waste stream, and whether that's waste plastic that's going to be traded or exported under Basel Convention or other mechanisms, or another way to manage it at the end of life here domestically. And so in the United States here, I mean, that's going to likely be landfilling or incineration, since many of the low quality, low density plastics really can't be recycled. And I know that you're U.S. focused, but in developing nations, and when the Pact is looking at it from their lens, their lowest carbon choice and perhaps the most economical choice, might be in the short term waste to energy or landfilling. So again, although you guys are looking at it from the borders within the United States to create a path forward to realize a circular economy in the United States, it's still very much a global effort, right? Your organization, as you mentioned, you have representation from multinational, corporations, and the reality of the situation is that we are a global economy, and we trade commodities and waste across international boundaries, and you know, what may be preferred here and feasible here may not necessarily be achievable in other parts of the world. So how do you balance those solutions so that vulnerable communities and ecosystems abroad are not disproportionately impacted by, you know, what we deem here in the United States is a viable solution? And I think that's going to be the challenge of the multinational corporations that, you know, that have different solutions regionally, you know, in other countries versus, you know, how they vie for something to be managed here in the US.
Yeah, a couple points on that. And I don't have a ton of detail, but I know, for example, the South African Pact has a big element of their work is the incorporation of the informal waste sector and how that plays into the recycling infrastructure in South Africa. I think they're the only one right now where that's particularly relevant. There may be others as more pacts get underway. I think for us in the US, a couple of things, like you alluded to, we are still exporting plastic waste from the US. One of the really interesting statistics that I dealt with a lot in my previous role before joining the pact was looking at production of plastic in the US versus our capacity to reclaim it or recycle it. And it's orders of magnitude different. So we we're able to produce far more. And I know that, like, not necessarily all of that production stays domestically, that a slice of that is exported, but still orders of magnitude different in terms of our processing capacity in the US, which, you know, at this point in time is mostly mechanical recycling to handle the material that we're generating. Because it's always interesting to me, one of the things that the multinational brands point that they make repeatedly, and it's like this weird, like, chicken and egg thing. They're already sensitive to, like, well, we've made these commitments and we don't have the supply isn't available, which is true and it's not true. It's true in that the supply isn't available for long-term contracts at the specs that they need at the price that they want. But, you know, and that's where we really sort of start to bump heads against, you know, you can look at these 4 targets and they really all sort of roll up to this reality that there isn't value in the US for a circular economy, whether it's plastics or another material. So, like, because the economics associated with the whole recycling system, I mean, I think it's particularly exacerbated with plastics or glass, less so for paper and metals, but the economics are just totally on their head. And so we're trying to create value in the system as the pact to overcome some of those economic hurdles. So, you know, so we can sort of, it's that trickle back effect. Like, we need the brands to commit and demand that recycled feedstock so that investment can sort of trickle back through the whole system, and we're able to expand capacity and we're able to better educate consumers and so on.
Yeah. A couple of questions from the audience I want to make sure I get to, because I oftentimes run out of time for some of these. Do you have a sense of what part of the world most of the plastic packaging products get manufactured?
For that are going on to the US market?
I guess you could.
Where they're manufactured?
Yeah, or I guess just globally where most of the production is.
I don't know that I can answer that globally. I mean, I know sort of the major brands, a lot of their production is happening either here in Mexico or Canada, as far as the US market goes. But yeah, I don't know that I'm well equipped to answer that.
Yeah, and then what about the replacement for plastics packaging? How would the Plastics Pact evaluate the, that the replacements don't have significant negative environmental impacts?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think it's something that that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the PACs could do a better job of communicating, is that, it's not like, oh, we have these blinders on and we're just hell bent on circularity. I think that added question and assessment around carbon impact and broader environmental impacts, it rings true. And where I see it coming into play and where we've discussed it as a pact is around, as you're designing for products to sort of remain in the system, whether it's you're designing for reuse, you need to do an evaluation of what that means in terms of environmental impacts. Likely, there are definitely water impacts if you're washing things.
So like a life cycle assessments.
Yeah, so thinking about it as part of the design process, or because that comes up too when you talk about using greater amounts of bio-based or recycled content versus virgin content. So
okay, all right. So I want to get your thoughts on sustainability and circular economy, because it's obviously gaining a lot of traction, but it's been around since the late 1970s, and sustainability even longer. And there's tons and tons of interpretations and definitions about what it is. I mean, how do you characterize, whether that's that's you've been in this industry a long time, or the U.S. Plastics Pact? How do you characterize what sustainability is and what a circular economy is? Because it varies greatly across the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of jargon thrown around, which can get really confusing. Like, it was really instructive to me. It was only a year ago or so, I was reading an article in Forbes that was about a circular economy effort. And basically every time they used the term, they defined it. And that just was like, all right, I need to get out of my bubble. If they're continually defining what this is for the Forbes audience, then, most people don't understand what that means. I think from a really basic standpoint, it just means sort of designing away from waste and thinking about sort of how do we keep valuable materials, whether it's plastic or something else, like in the system. How do we continue to find value from those materials and keep them in the system in some way? There sort of true purists out there that sometimes forget, like, you need energy inputs like all around the value chain. Like, you can't get away from that. It's probably more of a question of what those energy inputs are. But again, just like thinking about how you keep materials in play with their highest use in mind, and that sort of being the framework.
Yeah, it seems like when I do a lot of reading about circular economy around the globe, it's like, are we even talking about the same thing? I mean, Germany, theirs used to be, they're very heavy industrial economy, right? And so they look at theirs through material flows and material availability. And so theirs has been heavily focused on resource efficiency and top-down materials management approach. In China, which has a national policy since the early 2000s. I mean, theirs has been end of pipe, but their more recent versions are looking at eco design and now they have an innovation agenda where they're looking at how to re-engineer things and integrating things like green chemistry and things like that. And Netherlands has been strictly focused on innovation of materials and different business models. And but largely, when you look at EU and when parts of the U.S. talks about circular economy in years past, it's really been waste management and it's really started from kind of downstream consideration. So I think there's a long ways to go for us to really understand and converge on a definition, but certainly, if we want to reach that sustainability that we're looking for, we really have to start looking at devising solutions that are circular, and whether that's starting from just processes or products or whatever. But it is a systems level approach. But yeah, very, very challenging to really come together on what that means. Okay, so let me see about some of these other questions here for you. Companies are making commitments to increase their use of recycled plastic, but often these companies have not even created a team to evaluate new sources or new suppliers of recycled plastics. Will companies that sign the pact be more transparent in how they will accomplish their recycled content targets?
Yes, definitely. The intention is that, probably not, from a very specific sort of company production plan, sort of protecting that level of confidentiality, but thinking more broadly, if we can get, I think it would be amazing if we could get companies to make sort of public commitments to purchasing sort of on a long-term basis. Or there's some interesting JVs that have happened recently with Dow and Avangard Innovative around creating a sort of a blended PCR virgin resin. Braskem is another company that's been doing that in the PE and polypropylene space. So I think some of those things are really interesting. The question, Rachel, that was raised at the very beginning of the Q&A, that I think the brands all know, like the polymer engineering expertise lies upstream. And so being able to tap into that in terms of greater use of recycled content and what the opportunities are and what the limitations are. Another company that's been doing a lot of work in that space with their customers and clients is Nova. And sort of bringing that engineering expertise to this universe where maybe they haven't previously.
And so all of your targets hit on 2025, but what happens after 2025?
That's a good question. I've kind of asked the same thing. I don't know if we just kind of like disappear or
work on executing some of the targets.
Or well, I'm sure we'll still be executing. We haven't even I haven't even let my mind go there because we're just trying to get our roadmap together, and then we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, well, with the incoming Biden administration, there's going to be a push for, I think there's going to be a greater push for sustainability and definitely a clean energy revolution and perhaps even more transparency around sustainability. Knowing that there's a growing plastic and microplastic waste streams out there that stem from a whole variety of sources and across a number of different industries, textiles, fishing and renewable energies. And now with the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 awaiting the president's signature, do you think that the U.S. Plastics Pact or other plastic pact that are in the network, do you think there's going to be a future strategic focus on widening the scope to include other types of plastics outside of the packaging realm that are known to cause stressors in the system, like polyester and nylon fibers from fashion industry, clothes industry, electronics and other bulky rigid plastics? Is there consideration for looking at some of those things? Because I mean, we know that packaging is the largest when it comes to the waste issues that we have, but we really don't fully understand and appreciate all of the different microplastics that are causing contamination issues out there. Many of them stem from things outside of the packaging realm.
Yeah, those are all really good points. I think, for now, we're just focused on packaging. I know for the US, it's something like 40% of plastic produced in the US goes into packaging. So there's still that remaining 60% that's going into, a whole suite of other products. And that, again, is just for the US. I think we're pretty well situated looking at primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging and the universes of those, and that there's plenty of work there to focus on over the next 4 years. So right now there isn't an intention to broaden that. I think there's some interesting though, like intersection. So for example, with the textile industry, like you can't dismiss, for when you talk about the PET bottle stream, for example, a slice of that is mechanically recycled, but then a bigger chunk of that material, that recycled PET, is going back into textiles. So it's still circular use, just different. I mean, it's not going back into packaging. But then, maybe thinking from a material standpoint for those purposes about PET and rPET as a whole, for example, because I know that there are chemical recycling technologies out there that then, even coming out of that textile stream, could then supply PET, recycled PET, back into the packaging stream. So there are some sort of synergies and crossovers there, but we're not looking to take on the whole universe at this point.
Yeah, incremental is great. Yeah, I mean, we got to make progress, and so that you're all staying focused and to scope it. That's important. So I wanna ask you something about. So this kind of ropes in several questions that we have up here, and then questions that we've had in prior webinars, and things that I've touched on before in the past, and that's on the waste hierarchy and zero waste initiatives. The waste hierarchy, when you look at that, it doesn't necessarily distinguish between different forms of recycling. And as you know, not all recycling is created equal, right? We have the chemical recycling that has very little degradation of material and can maintain that material at a higher value without downcycling that occurs in the traditional systems that we're reliant on today. And even when a material is recycled, there can still be poorly designed products and packaging that use a lot of energy, water, and other resources. And so if we're using life cycle assessments and life cycle costing, some recycling can demonstrate high energy, resource, and intensity coupled with all these exorbitant costs and transportation. And you've been a part of life cycle assessments before at ACC and your other endeavors. So when you look at the economics and the environmental factors, I mean, that could really make or break the case for recycling and create further strains on the ecosystem. So the economics of recycling is very much location dependent, and some of the end of life management methods like landfilling or pyrolysis and some of the materials that outperform other materials may not necessarily be socially or politically acceptable, and could be counter conventional wisdom. So in this sense, when you look at circular economy principles, they may in fact be in conflict with the waste hierarchy principles and do life cycle assessments. They challenge the framework of a circular economy because sometimes in the end, landfilling may, when you look at the data, may fare better.
Yeah, there's a lot to tease out there. Yeah, I think I don't think life cycle assessment and circularity, if you want to call it that, need to be mutually exclusive. I can see how, though, there are people and conversations that kind of quickly fall into that trap. I think there will always be tension around some things like waste to energy, and differing opinions around the associated human health and environmental impacts that come with that. And I don't know that we'll ever escape that. I think pyrolysis or the gasification or glycolysis or whatever the chemical recycling technology is definitely on the table and within scope. I think where the pact sort of takes more of a purist's view in that regard is the output of the conversion technology needs to be a chemical product that's sold as a feedstock for another, for manufacturing another product rather than a fuel that will then be combusted. So that is, in the scheme of things, as far as like the pact is concerned, that's not considered to be circular. But I'm well aware too, like as technologies are growing and gaining traction this is sort of the pathway that we need to solidify before we move on to further refinement of the end product. Like, don't throw that out. It's just more a matter of, at this point in time, like what gets counted and what doesn't get counted as circular. Yeah, that tension piece around sort of what the best end of life situation is. I think it also matters just like what your priorities are. And I know there'll always be competing priorities amongst different groups or governments. So I mean, that's something just to probably continual conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and so the whole concept of downcycling, is that, I mean, is that a part of an integrated solution? I guess the desired end state would be like full circularity, because if you recycle plastics into other uses, eventually those are going to have an end of life too. So maybe like the ideal would be to re-engineer the polymer so that it's infinitely recyclable, I suppose. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I mean, again, like there are those out there who think, well, we should just be prioritizing like bottle to bottle. It needs to be, but realistically, and the way that the economy works, that's not, I don't personally believe that that's a viable option. And I mean, as with the example I gave before, a lot of that recycled nylon goes into the textile industry and then is made into what are in effect durable goods. So they have
Yeah.
yes, eventually they'll have an end of life, but then again, and I think that's where there's greater opportunity further down the road, and where I'm hopeful that chemical recycling in a meaningful way will be realized to help then with some of those durable goods. People often wonder, like if for films, say in particular, it's really hard to recycle a low density polyethylene film back into a low density, like a blown film. A lot of costs, both environmental and dollars involved in making that happen. But there are other sort of durable goods that could go into that may have a 30-year lifespan. And yeah, it kind of comes down to sort of agreeing on like, well, what is our goal here, and what are we trying to do, and is that acceptable, and marrying that with what's realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you have a big role, and a lot of priorities and a lot of work ahead of you, and I'm excited to see where it goes, and we're excited to be a part of that and contribute in any way that we can going forward. But this is great. I mean, in today's resource constrained world and rapid population growth, urbanization, we're finally seeing, I think, that a linear model of the take, make, use, and dispose is no longer fit for purpose. So it's great to see that there's a lot of effort and a lot of consensus from actors all across the supply chain, value chain, really, to change that. And so, I think there's a whole lot of benefits here, social, environmental benefits, and, a great way to bolster the US economy and the global economy. So it's really hopeful to see the level of engagement here and the collaboration of US Plastics Pact. And so, Emily, this has been wonderful. I think, yeah, we have just a minute left here. So I just wanted to take this time to thank you, and look forward to seeing where this goes, and congratulations on this new leadership role. And I'll definitely be in touch with you here in the near future, so we can talk about how we can help contribute some of our minds here to this effort. So it's we look forward to doing that.
Thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate the opportunity. For anyone who's interested, we do have a website, usplasticspact.org, and there every so often. We are sending out newsletters with just updates about what's going on. If you'd like to sign up for those, or yeah, glad to stay in touch, Rachel, and thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all of the Baker Institute CES webinar viewers, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for your support, and everybody have a really safe, happy holiday season, and we'll see you all in 2021. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you.